So as you may have noticed, even after the Wake of the Water update, Enshrouded doesn't currently have any craftable round tables. They may add some down the road, but if they don't, you can still make some pretty cool ones out of props. I've played around with quite a few of the decorative items, and in this video I'll show you 3 different techniques and 6 designs that I like. Let me know your favorite in the comments. Depending on the prop you choose, you'll need to use one of 3 methods to make a nice round table. Method 1, you can crisscross your prop to make the opposite corners touch, and you repeat that all the way around. Option 2, you can rotate around an outer corner and just use a fixed number of rotations. Option 3, you can find a center point and rotate around those inner corners in the center. Right now, I'm using the ballroom of my castle to show you each of the designs, and I'm still deciding which style is going to stay here. For the rest of this video, I'll show you how to build all 6 of these designs and share some general tips for your own designs. I'll speed up the video a bit because building with props can be pretty tedious, but I also don't want to give anyone motion sickness, so it's still pretty long. Feel free to skip ahead to the ones you actually want to see, and you won't hurt my feelings if you jump around. Now, let's head over to the workspace and get building. This first table is probably my favorite, and to make it, you'll need 5 polished wooden shelves. We'll use the crisscross technique so that the shelf supports make these nice table legs you see in the corners. The crisscross technique works well for long, thin props that are asymmetrical, where the front and back are different. It can take quite a bit of fiddling around, but I do promise it does get easier. I will say though, this is the least forgiving method for making round tables, and when you place that last shelf, you might notice a gap that you'll need to fix. That's more likely to happen with this method because you're trying to perfectly match up 2 sets of corners at once, while with the other techniques you only have to pay attention to 1 set of corners. With any prop in Enshrouded, making them flush is often one of the more frustrating parts. Sometimes it looks like you're placing a prop 1 tick higher than the one that's already there, and then it's perfectly aligned when you actually place it. With other props, it needs to look like it's 1 lower in order to be flush. For these polished wooden shelves, just know that they'll be flush when the one you're placing is 1 notch above the one that's already there, or it'll look that way. Just take your time with it. You may have noticed earlier that in each corner of my ballroom, I had one of these polished round tables, but they were elevated a bit, and that's because they had a pedestal in the middle. All I did there was I put a bow weapon rack in the center, and then used that to build the table. It does look a bit strange with the table legs dangling in the air, but I wanted those tables to be taller, sort of like cocktail tables. We'll see if they stay there though. You'll repeat this crisscrossing process all the way around, and you might want to step back and just look at how the shelf is oriented before you place them to make sure that you're lining up the supports the way you want them. If you did a good job lining up both sets of corners each time, you won't have a gap at the end, or at least the gap will be small enough that it's not really noticeable. So there's our table made from polished wooden shelves, and we'll use this same technique to make our next one. This second table will use 5 carved wooden shelves, and like our last table, we'll crisscross them to form the table legs. Earlier I said that when you're trying to make props flush, some have to look like they're 1 move above the prop that's already there, while others have to look like they're 1 move below. The polished wooden shelves needed to be 1 move above, and for whatever reason, these carved wooden shelves need to be 1 move below. I don't make the rules, it's just the way it is. I'm not sure why, but this one has always been more challenging to me too, and I often wind up with bigger gaps than I'd like at the end. If that happens to you, it probably means that one of the sets of shelf corners is overlapping too much. Even just being off by 1 rotation can make a noticeable gap at the end. You can usually fix this by fiddling with the last 2 shelves to close the gap a bit. If that doesn't do it, it also doesn't take too much time to start over and make the corners of each shelf just barely touch. Full disclosure here, this recording was actually my second attempt at recreating this table. In the first take, the gap was too big for me to fix at the end, and so I had to start over. And there's our carved wooden round table with some nice rounded table legs. For our next table, we'll need 12 small Boreal wood cupboards, plus some sort of prop you want to use in the center. I used a steel barrel for mine, but you could also use plates, rugs, or other props to change the style. For this table, we're going to use the second method I mentioned in the beginning, and just place the cupboards side by side with the outer corners barely touching. With each one you place, you'll count out however many rotations you're going to do. You're free to rotate as much or as little as you like, but if you only do one rotation, you're going to need way more cupboards and you'll wind up with a huge open space in the middle. It might be nice for a war council room or something, and you can definitely fill in more cupboards or Boreal wood tables, but it is kind of absurdly big. Rotating the cupboards twice gives you a more practical size and leaves a hole in the middle that you can easily fill with a single prop. More rotations will give you a tighter fit in the center, but it also makes sharper angles so it's less rounded. This technique is a lot more forgiving than the crisscross method, and since you're using more props and only matching up one pair of corners each time, you're a lot less likely to have problems. As you can probably tell already, this table is a lot higher than our last two. It looks fine as decor, but it's almost as tall as your character. I do like how it looks, but if you don't like the height, you'd probably be fine tipping the cupboards face down on their doors first to make them shorter. Our gap in the middle here is pretty small, and the inner corners of the cupboards do make a nice little pattern where they come together, but I still think the barrel is one of the better finishing touches to put in the middle. For our next table, we're going back to the polished wood set with a polished wood side table. You'll need 12 side tables to make one table. And for this one, you'll also want something you can put in the center. I went ahead and put a rug in there. With these last two designs, you may have noticed that it's a lot easier to make these props perfectly align. You don't have to worry about whether the prop you're placing is one move above or below the one that came before. That's because we're keeping our cursor on the flat surface of the blocks below the entire time. With the first two designs, my cursor was on the shelves themselves, so the first prop is basically the surface that you're working from. Cursor placement is one of the trickiest parts of using props in Enshrouded, but once you understand how it works, it's a lot easier to make the game do what you want. Anytime you're working with props, you always want to give yourself a good surface to move your cursor on, whether it's vertical or horizontal. For some more complicated prop builds, you'll sometimes want to wrap props in blocks to give yourself a consistent surface, then delete them when you're done. I probably do that most often when I'm using props that have really irregular shapes, or if I'm using props to create irregular shapes, and I need to align them in weird places. But for making tables, a floor works just fine. As you get to the end and try to place the final prop, you'll notice it becomes a lot harder to get it in the right spot. That's because now there's a lot less floor space for me to keep my cursor on. So as I try to finesse the prop into place, my cursor keeps touching the edges of the props that are already there. And since the prop's position is in relation to my cursor and the surface it's on, as soon as my cursor touches a new surface, the prop jumps around. So you may have to move your character's point of view a bit to give yourself the right angle to keep your cursor on the floor where you want it, which can make it a bit tricky to keep track of where you want the prop in relation to the other props. This next table is probably the most basic looking, but I think it works well for decorating castles or stone houses. We'll use 5 simple stone coffins to make a nice round stone table. The large coffins are as tall as your character, and even if you sink them into the ground, they're so wide that you'd need to make it massive in order to keep your table round looking. But the simple stone coffins fit together a lot like the shelves and give you a nice basic stone look. The trick with these is that one side of the coffin has a rounded corner and the other has a sharper corner, so you might want to alternate the ends to make it look a little more symmetrical, or just play around with making it look irregular. You could get by with just 4 coffins, but that 5th one is nice for touching up any weird spots. This last table looks really cool and is surprisingly easy to make, but it's a bit niche. I might use this in the alchemist tower of my castle, but it doesn't look like anything that belongs in a dining room. It has a neat sort of steampunk look. For this one, I used a stone post in the center to make a pedestal, which makes a nice point of rotation. You can keep your cursor on the post the entire time and just rotate, place, and repeat. It also helps that a stack of windows takes just 1 inventory slot, so you don't have to swap slots for each new piece like you do with some of the other props. For this table, I used 6 rotations per window. You might have to move out of the way to place the last couple, but you could save yourself the trouble if you work from above by standing on a block or something. Overall though, this is probably the fastest and easiest of the table making methods. I hope this video was helpful and gave you some ideas. I'd love to hear which design was your favorite in the comments, or if you found another prop that works well for decorative round tables, please share. And if you want to see more Enshrouded build videos like this, you can let me know with a subscribe. Thanks for watching.